minus the booze for the kids so they can enjoy the cake as well. We've got a combination of flavours including coconut, pineapple and mango. Coming out of lockdown, the first thing I can think of is everyone wants to go on a tropical holiday, go off to Queensland, obviously based in Victoria. It reminds me of summer, you know, by the pool, and I love all those fruits. So for me, summer brings all the beautiful flavours of your nectarines and your plums and the gorgeous aromatics from all your tropical fruits. So that's what inspired me for this cake. You know, it's going to bring a smile to your face when you enjoy it. It'll be a great way to end a celebration meal. I'm just soaking the gelatin leaves in some cold water. So it's just 2 leaves of leaf gelatin. While that's happening, I pop 300 grams of the cream and the sugar into the Thermomix, bring that to 90 degrees for 2 minutes. Then once that's done, I squeeze the water out of the gelatin, pop that into the bowl, stir that through and then mix through the mascarpone for maybe 10 seconds. All of that then goes into a container and into the refrigerator for 24 hours. It's time to make the sweet dough, which is the base of the cake. We've got some icing sugar, some plain flour, I've got 1 egg, we're going to put in a pinch of baking powder and I've got 100 grams of butter. We're going to set for 30 seconds on speed 4. There's enough dough here to make 2 bases. Pop it in some cling wrap, get it nice and flat and pop it into the fridge for half an hour just to harden the butter. Time to make the peanut brittle. I'm using macadamias. I'm actually using salted macadamias. The salt adds a really lovely flavour to the cake. We're adding water, glucose and lemon juice. It's time to take your dough out of the fridge. It's been in there for about half an hour. You can use the mats that are available on the mix shop. However, you can't cut on these mats. So my preference is to use a guitar sheet. You can cut on guitar sheets. And flip this straight into the oven. We're making the lime zest cake. The ingredients that you'll need is some self-raising flour. We've obviously got some sugar, some butter, some eggs. I've used a peeler to take off the peel from the lime because we're going to zest that inside the Thermomix. Once it's blended in the Thermomix, we're literally going to pour it out into our tray. That's then going into a 160-degree oven for 15 minutes to bake. Now we're on to part 1 of our assembly. We're going to place the disc into the bottom of our cake tin. The brittle's set, so we're ready to break it so we can make our brittle paste. We're using blend mode, not just used for breakfast smoothies, it's actually quite good for blending nut butters. So now we're making the caramel cream, starting off by basically popping our gelatin with our water. In goes my cream cheese, followed by 100 grams of our brittle paste. And we're going to use blend mode again, speed 6. Ready to take the cake out of the fridge so we can pop our jelly layer on, which is going to go back into the freezer to set. We're then using some of the leftover sponge to crumble. It's going to create another texture. So we're getting to the end of the cake, it's really exciting. Mascarpone whip. This has been in the fridge for 24 hours. It's time to decorate to serve your cake. I've toasted some coconut chips. I'm just decorating just a little bit of lime and my dried pineapple flowers. My tropical sunshine cake.
Welcome everybody. I'm so proud of Irene when I look at that video. I'm extremely proud to have her in my team, and I know a lot of the people that come on here on a regular basis with us have learnt an awful lot from her. So I'm thrilled that there are a lot more of you on here today to learn from our incredible team member Irene and our thermostar, and we'll talk a little bit more about thermostars a bit later on. In the meantime, if you've got any questions as we're going along, please pop them in the chat box down the bottom. And thank you. There was a really nice comment there, Irene, about you down there before, or up there, wherever it is. I've lost it. But we will get on with today because you haven't come to see me chatting. You've come to see Irene. So we will spotlight Irene. Boone, can you find her? Oh, yes, there she is.
Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Irene.
Hi, thanks so much for coming along. We will talk a little bit more about the cake later, and any questions you've got, I'm happy to answer them. But today's all about choux pastry. So I want to know any challenges people have had, you know, pop your questions in. Marilyn, voting's still open, so we'll talk a little bit more about that in a while. But pop your questions in. We've got Boone and we've got Mandy in the background, so they'll ask me, or obviously they'll read out the questions as they come up so I can keep going with all of this. But essentially what we want to do is cover off the things that can go wrong with choux pastry and the things that I've learned along the way to try and help you get really perfect results with your choux pastry. So the first thing I'm going to do is point you to the recipe that I like to use, and it's not the profiterole recipe or the choux pastry recipe. It's actually Christy Tanya's 20th anniversary showstopper. So in that recipe, and Boone or Mandy can pop the link in so you guys can see it. So Christy Tanya's 20th anniversary showstopper. In there, she's got two recipes we're going to follow today, one being the choux pastry and the other one being the sablé, that, you know, in English meaning shortbread biscuit. So we're going to do both. So I'm going to start with the choux pastry. Now, for anyone that's using, once you've clicked into the recipe, rather than clicking on start and next till you get to that screen, you can actually scroll through the recipe and jump straight into the recipe that you want to create. So I'm going to start with the choux pastry, which is step 9. So I've found that on my screen, and I'm simply going to click on that, and that takes me straight to the choux pastry screen. Okay, so in this recipe, it basically asks for milk, water, butter, there's some salt and some sugar in here. They're all going to go in together. If you don't put the milk in, you're going to get very blonde coloured choux pastry. So, and it's not a lot of, you know, so I do recommend that you put milk in. I've used full cream. You could use a light milk as well. So they're all going in. And essentially what we're doing is we're going to cook those for 2 minutes. You want to melt the butter, essentially, and dissolve any sugar. It's essentially a pinch of sugar and the salt that's gone in there. So we're going to do that for the 2 minutes. And that goes through at 85 degrees. While it's doing that, and hopefully you guys can hear me, so give me a thumbs up, Mandy, if everything's all right from a sound perspective. Great. I'm going to show you a couple of things you can do to start getting ready. So let's talk about the equipment that you're going to need to use. So piping bags. On the mix shop, we've got our Thermix green bags. These are great, reusable, and they come with a set of green tips. There's a combination of the round and I guess the star tip. And it also comes with a coupler so that they can fit into there. Now, one of the piping tips that I'm using today does not come from the mix shop. It's actually called a choux pastry tip. And that comes, I've bought that from Sable School. I've got a link, so I'll show you exactly where I got that from. What I've also bought while I'm there is this cream pastry filler. Again, not on the mix shop, so you can get both of those from Sable, as well as the guitar sheet that you saw me rolling the pastry out. And I like these because you can actually see what you're doing. Again, from Sable School. So these are all Kirsten Tibbles. Kirsten Tibbles is a brilliant pastry chef. I pale in comparison. She's absolutely amazing. I've learned so much from her, and a lot of the tips that I'm doing today, I've learned from jumping onto her website. I am a subscribed user, so I've learned so much from her. I'm very passionate about trying to perfect some techniques, as Mandy knows. So jump on there and you'll be able to get those, but we'll cover those. I've actually got them in the cart. I'll show you exactly where to go and get those in a little while. But because the coupler is quite large on the green bag, what you'll notice is when I try and use this one, it goes straight through the hole. So I've got another bag that I've cut the hole smaller so that I can use that in there. So maybe don't, instead of cutting both of your green bags, keep one aside. Okay, so that's gone through. for my 2 minutes. And you'll see that the butter is melted. So we're ready to go on to the next step, which is essentially to add 90 grams of plain flour. Now you can use bread flour. If you use plain flour, you'll get a thinner crust on your choux pastry. If you use bread flour, you'll get a thicker crust. If anyone's bought eclairs from, what's that pastry shop at Chedstone? I've gone blank. Anyone?
Don't ask me.
Yeah, anyway, it'll come to me later. They've got quite a few pastry shops. Anyway, it gives you a thicker crust. So basically swap them around depending on how thick you like the crust to come out or how thick you want that pastry. And I do like a thicker crust. I'm just using the plain flour. So without the measuring cup, this is going to cook for 7 minutes. So that's where this recipe differs to the choux pastry recipes or the profiterole recipe. So I quite like this. You do need to cook it out for this amount of time to really get the water to absorb and develop the gluten inside the flour, which is what gives you that puff. And you'll see what I mean when you see the results. So I'm just going to keep this going. So that's 7 minutes on speed 2.5. I will stop halfway to scrape down. The reason I do that is because what happens is the flour sometimes bunches in and around the blade, or it could bunch in and around to the top of the bowl. And you want to get all of that flour incorporated really well into the mixture. So around halfway, I'm going to stop that. Okay.
There's a question, Irene, sorry.
Yes.
Why do you like this recipe over other recipes?
So what I found with this recipe is it actually develops that gluten better, and it gives me what I call a perfect choux. So I've deliberately baked some disasters to show you what some of the things that can go wrong. So let me just show you. This is exactly the same recipe, not cooked out properly. So I've ended up with something very small, very flat, and yet I've managed to get the air, and that's purely by cooking out that flour longer. I've also used that biscuit on top. Again, this isn't perfect, and I've done this deliberately to show you where things go wrong, but that shows you the difference. Now, the other thing you'll find with baker's flour is you'll get even more lift than this one. So I will show you what they originally started at in terms of size so that you can see what's happened. So please follow this recipe. It really does work. You really need to cook out that flour properly in order for it to absorb the eggs properly. And we've done some eclairs as well, so I'll go through those in a little bit. Okay, while that's happening, I want to show you a couple of things. Now, on our mix shop, we have a pastry mat, which is what we roll on. We're not using that today. What we also have is our baking mat and also our tray liners. This is from the mix shop. Now, this doesn't have any holes in it. So when you hold it up to the light, it's actually a solid piece of, I guess, silicone, if you want to call it that. You may have heard of these two brands called a Silpat and a Silpane. Silpat is exactly the same as what we've got on the mix shop. Okay? Perfect for baking pizzas, pastries, all sorts of things. This is called a Silpane mat. The right word in there. Silpane, those holes, I can actually see through them. So it's perforated. Now, the reason you want to get a Silpane is you want that airflow through the bottom of your pastry so you get the height and the lift. So anything like choux pastry, this really does help. The other thing I like about these is that it actually is reusable. So you're not wasting baking paper. What I wouldn't do is don't cook something with garlic and then try and use it for pastry. Particularly when you're using these, I did that with one of my early day mats, and I just can't get rid of that smell. So try and separate your baking mats between, I guess, your sweet and savoury. Having said that, earlier, again, to bake my duds, you'll see the size difference, maybe not quite so much. See how that one's a little bit bigger? that's been baked on my Silicone. The other one's been baked on the Thermomix mat. Okay. Is the difference a worry? Not really. Like, I wouldn't stress if you don't have a Silicone. But if you're looking for perfection, and some people are that are on this class today, that invest in a Silicone mat. Again, you can find those on Save the School, Kirsten Tiddler's website. Okay, now, for those that don't have any of that, I'm going to show you another technique. So don't use baking paper. You want whatever you're doing to adhere to the tray. So what I've done here, actually, 1 second, guys, because remember I said I'm going to scrape halfway through. So we've got 2 and a bit minutes to go. Remember, when it's gone over that 100 degrees, it is going to have that 20-second countdown. So be patient. It's okay. 20 seconds goes really quickly. So I've got 2 and a bit minutes to go. And I really want to show you that. So you'll see a little bit of flour sitting right on the top of the blade, and there's a little bit of flour up and around the sides. It's really important to cook that properly. So I'm just using some of that pastry, or some of the dough, I should say, just to scrape that down really thoroughly. The other thing you'll start to see is it starts to stick to the bottom of the bowl. You'll see a little bit of build up. That's perfect. We do want that, because that's telling me that there's enough heat and it's starting to really get that into my pastry. So that's brilliant. So scrape that, pop it back on, around halfway. Even in my case, I've got about 2 minutes to go. I'm just going to finish that off. I'm just going to swap screens for 1 second. Oops. Have we done that? Excuse me. That's the wrong buttons. All right. So I've got my baking tray. So this is my enamel tray from my oven. I have greased that lightly. I'm literally going to take some flour and I'm going to move that around on my tray. I quite like this technique. And this is when you want to pipe freeform. Lift your tray up, hang down that excess, and you've got that ready to go. And then I just use the pastry scraper. No waste. It just goes straight back into my. Okay. Now, the reason I like this technique is if you want to have these, pipe them straight away. Again, you can use your. We've got. Where did I do it? Yep. So we've got the green one on. We've got the green one on the mixture. So you can mark lines, which are going to be your guide to pipe your eclairs. And then you can also use the piping nozzles that you get with your piping bags. So we can do round ones. A little bit wider, actually, probably a little bit too close. Remember how they're going to puff up quite a bit. So you don't need to get the mats with the circles on them. This technique works really, really well. Okay. Now back to this one. Okay. Everyone okay with the tray technique? Really, really easy. So it now asks you to set this aside to allow it to cool for about 10 minutes or until it reaches 55 degrees. So for me, the easiest way to do that is by hand to get it to happen really, really quickly. If you're too lazy, and in my case, a little bit busy, pop it back on
I'm going to go back one step. So instead of stirring it for 7 minutes with temperature, I'm going to turn that temperature all the way down. And I'm just going to keep stirring it. Speed 2 is fine, even lower, so it's not so loud. Speed 1's enough. And what you'll see is the temperature in the middle there. At the moment, it's about 80 degrees. And I'm waiting till that hits 55, at which stage I'm going to add my eggs so that I don't scramble them. Okay, so that's my tray. And of course, I've got my other tray here, which I'm simply going to use my Silicone mat. So when I'm using the Silicone mat, same technique with the piping tip. I basically dip it in a little bit of water, a little bit of flour, and I mark it. And you can probably see the first circle I've done there anyway. Yep, so same idea. All right. Okay. About 75 degrees. So, is anyone a master piper? I'm not. So I've got a couple of tricks and tips you can use to give you perfectly even shaped profiteroles. And one is to use, silicone trays. On the mix shop, you will find this one. So what's it, 3, 6, 9, 12, 15. That size is quite small. So I like to use the baker's flour with these to get a little bit of lift and a decent size. This one here is off Kirsten's site. And you can see from the shape of the hole, it's about double that size. But essentially, that one there started off looking like that, okay? So you can see it almost triples in size. But how perfect is that? So essentially all I do is pop them out of the mold. I literally made these last night. It's all of probably, what did we say? Maybe 15 minutes all up of your time. And they're ready to go. So
Irene, were they frozen or just in the fridge?
These are frozen. So I've basically filled these silicone trays, used an offset spatula to scrape them clear, straight into the freezer.
That's fantastic. Make them well ahead of time.
Much easier. Now, the beautiful thing about silicone, now you can't do this with metal trays because this stuff will not come out of a metal tray. I've tried. As I said, you learn from them, you try different things. You will find this one on the mix shop. You'll find this one also 15, but it's a bigger size. You'll find that on Sable Biscuit. Here's a couple of other fun ones. They're donut trays, so you can get donut shapes. Donut shape. So anyone who's had a Paris breast, you can do the donut shape. Now, have we got any Italians on today? Any Italians on our class today? Yes, Teresa. Teresa, is it Zappole? Zappoli? I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. Basically, it's deep fried choux pastry, Italian donuts.
Zeppole.
Zeppole, there you go, the correct pronunciation. So choux pastry, same sort of thing. So basically, I have filled, not all the way to the top, I've half filled the donut tray. Who doesn't like donuts? But essentially, I can deep fry these. Okay. And you fry them from frozen. We're going 65. Just get this. Oh. Okay. All right. Have you made the Zachary, Teresa?
Oh, never. I'm not a pastry.
Oh, well, you are now. Okay. All right. Okay, so now this is a little bit weird in this. So I'm just going to read through this so that you're all with me. So set aside the mixing bowl until it reaches that 55 degrees. When you click on next, it basically says scrape it down again. No problem. Next, without the measuring cup on, it says turn the speed selector to 2.5. Let's follow this. So when I do that, and then click on next, and then for some reason it counts up instead of counting down. So I think there's a little bit of an error in that recipe. So I don't want to, oops. I'm just going to stop it. So do me a favor, go all the way to the step that says turn the speed selector to 3 for 30 seconds. So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to add my eggs. Now I've lightly beaten those eggs all in. Now you'll notice I've got an extra egg here. I'll explain why as soon as we get to the end of this 6 seconds. Okay, so now the first thing you'll see is it actually hasn't mixed this properly. So I'm going to put it back on. And instead of using speed 3, I'm going to use speed 5. Ten seconds should be enough. Let's mix this through. Okay. So remember, there was 2 things I did. One was making sure the flour was incorporated really, really well. This can do with a little bit more mixing. I'm going to do that. The other thing I'm looking for is how this is falling off my spatula. So you can see it doing that kind of that V shape as it's dropping down. That's perfect. Now, the reason it's perfect is because I've used 800 or size 800 eggs. Now, everyone uses different size eggs at home. If you're not getting that V drop, then you don't have enough egg in there. So I always have an extra egg ready to go along with my, my container with my fork, ready to beat in. And you might only need a half an egg. But I find with this recipe, if you're not buying size 800 eggs, don't worry about it. Just make sure you've got that extra egg ready to go. But I know this mixture is not mixed enough, so I'm going to go for another 10 seconds on speed 5. What I'm looking for is something that looks like beautiful, creamy, glossy hollandaise. No lumps. I want it perfect. And this looks great. I'm sorry, I'll put it on the other side of the spatula so you can actually see it. See how glossy, smooth that is? And it's not quite moving. Now see how it's not too bad actually. I'm okay with that, yeah? You don't want too much movement. It's the end of the world if it's a bit runny, but do not add more flour. I'd rather you start with less eggs than try and, you can't add more flour to this. Once it's done, it's done. Okay, so I've got myself, you basically need something to hold your piping bag up. So find a glass. I'm just using my percolator container. I'm going to use the choux pastry chip I talked about earlier. With the bag, you push part of the bag back in to stop obviously your mixture from falling out. That goes into my container. Bag over the top.
Irene, there's a question. Is it important to have the gloss on the mix?
Yes. This looks like really beautiful or a thickened version of a hollandaise. Like it's so beautiful glossy. If you haven't got enough gloss on it, it means you haven't mixed it enough. So I know this sounds terrible, but sometimes these recipes are guides. They've been tested and tested in that person's kitchen. But everything's, I guess our temperatures are different. The flour I've used is different. The eggs I've used are different. So you are going to get slightly different results. But if you follow those two things, cook that flour out, make sure every bit of flour that's stuck around the side of the bowl is accounted for. Or I should say mixed in thoroughly, and make sure this is mixed in thoroughly, then you know your mixture's good to go. Now, one of the tips that Kirsten talks about in terms of piping is to practice, practice, practice. I don't think it matters how much I've practiced. I'm not very good at it. So, but what she did use was mashed potato. I think she bought I think is it Deb that you can get from the supermarket? And she just practiced for hours and hours and hours and hours. So if you want to be a master piper, you can certainly do that. Okay, so I'm just going to stop cameras again. And we go to this one. So what you would have noticed is I'm squashing the bag, and that's I'm squashing out any air bubbles that are in that mixture. Now, when I'm piping things for the freezer, I am using the traditional Thermomix mats, not the ones with the holes, because that's how it's gone straight into my freezer last night. Now, you'll notice what I've done is I've piped in one long line, and it's very crooked. I told you I'm not a perfect piper. But what I can do is I can actually control the length of my choux pastry, and that way I'll get perfect eclairs when I cut them all in that same length, which is exactly what I'm going to do when I bake these. But for ones we want to cook now, because we want to have eclairs for dinner, and we haven't frozen any, it is really slow, guys. There's no one rushing you. I really should do this standing up, and then lift and pull back. Let me stand up and do that again. Okay. But as I said earlier, I'm quite comfortable about chopping them, so I quite like the freezer technique. And don't forget, these are going to triple in size. So that's been done on that Silicone, and again, just an example. So they're ready to go in the oven, but I'm going to use a sub lay over those, so I'll do that in a minute. Here's my tray from earlier. Again, just using the guide. Lift and come back in. Okay, this is not the right piping tip for circles, because what you don't want is tips and points like this. But I'm just going to do them. We're just going to fill them with some, I think we've got some ice cream we're going to have on there tonight. Got some leftover chocolate cake. We'll invent a filling, why not? Okay. It's just to give you a guide, yeah? With these ones, the round ones, definitely use a round tip. So maybe split the mixture into two, or do exactly what I did earlier, which is to use your molds, donut molds, round molds, etc. Because as you can see, this technique, you know, is going to give you perfect results every single time. Okay, I'm going to set those aside. Move on to the sublay. So what's the sublay? So that's our shortbread biscuit. Why do you want to use that? So basically, do you have a picture of the profiteroles on your screen? Actually, no, that's okay. Don't worry about it. But without using the sublay, you can see all the cracks that have happened in this example here. So they actually deform, so they don't hold their shape. So you can see how nice and rounded they've stayed versus, there's another reason that's happened, and I'll explain that in a second. But see how flat that's become and it's kind of deformed. It's not the end of the world, but I do think the sublay really helps to hold the shape of the profiterole. And it's really much more evident on the, excuse that, sorry, come out of focus. It's really more evident on the eclairs. Okay, back to the camera. Right, so we're going to do this Sable Biscuit, which is really, really simple. I've got butter that's in the fridge. Not a good day to be cooking in the oven, I think. We'll go back to the same recipe. Oops. And we go to the dots, go back to recipe detail, scroll down, I'm going to find the Sable Biscuit. Step 8, I believe it was. Okay, to make the Sable Biscuit, 130 grams of unsalted butter. I've just cut them into sort of 1-inch cubes. There's 50 grams of caster sugar, 50 grams of brown sugar, and there's 200 grams of plain flour. That literally all goes in together. And it mixes for 30 seconds on speed. Okay. Now, if the butter's melted, what you'll end up doing is overworking the dough. You'll see that that's still quite crumbly, and that's exactly what you want with this mixture. Now, in the recipe, it says to roll it out to 5 millimeters thick. 5 millimeters thick is far too thick. That's what I've done with this recipe. And what's happened is I've tried to cook it, it's cracked, and that's how I've ended up with those lines through here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pour about half that mixture out because I don't need it all. Just going to set that aside. I'm using, sorry, I'll swap screens again. I'm using the guitar sheets, guys. So the guitar sheets, again, they're on the Sable School. They are a really thick plastic that you can cut on. I'm kind of going to use my cookie cutters. In this case, I'm going to roll out my dough. I like this stuff because you can actually see what you're doing, which I think is a good thing. And all I'm doing is using my hands to bring it together. It's pretty warm in here. And it's not going to take very long to do this, which you'll see. And the reason I say mix half is because the guitar sheet that I've got here, it actually comes in one large piece. I've cut it into two. That's as much as that I can fit into my fridge. So a standard fridge, a whole guitar sheet simply won't fit. Okay.
Being very ignorant here, Irene, when you say guitar sheet, is it spelt like the instrument?
It is indeed.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Yeah, so we're going to go on to the Save School right at the end, so I can show you where all these other bits that I've bought are. We're in the shop.
Thank you.
Anyone that's serious about doing this, you can definitely use. You can use the pastry mats. They're on the mix shop. You can use the baking paper. You don't have to use the guitar sheet, but you'll see why I like it in a second. So it's now in between my layers. Take your rolling pin. And it's really like this is so forgiving. In fact, when I cut out some earlier, this is from the batch that I made yesterday. I'm literally going to add this into the dough that's left over when I finish today. Roll it out and just keep rolling it out. Now, you don't want to overwork this type of dough. And the reason for that, like shortbread, is if you overwork it, it'll shrink as it bakes. It's probably should add the butter out there a little bit of it. Anyway, just to give you an idea, yeah. So just lift it up, push it back in together. You get the idea. So roll it out as soon as you can get it. But like I said, the 5 ml is too thick, in my opinion. And that, for me, goes onto a tray that fits into my freezer. So I just lift the whole thing up together onto the tray and into the freezer. Move that out of the way. There's one I prepared earlier. So I had this in the freezer overnight. Take that first layer off. And it's been in the fridge for the last, I guess the last hour or so. So working with my sizes, so we're all understanding, that's the size of the one that I've just pulled out of the freezer. In terms of a cookie cutter, I want it to be bigger. Hopefully you guys can see that. So you see there's a border because I want it to come in and envelop down the sides. If I go even bigger, it's probably too big, yeah? Because then you'll have your crust will be falling off the side. So that size is pretty good. And essentially all I'm doing is cutting that using my a little offset spatula, which you can get from the mix shop. Slide it underneath, and then that sits on top like that. Now, the room's quite warm in here, which is okay. As that starts to soften at room temperature, it'll curve in and around the choux pastry. So I'm going to move that over to my tray. You can get cookie cutters for the eclairs. I don't have one, so I improvised. I've got the offset spatula and I literally cut the curve because it's curved on one end. It's a bit cheeky, isn't it? do what you got to do. And go back the other way. Oops. And that gave me the shape that I needed for the eclair. And it works, it works. So is everyone okay with that? They understand? So then what I've done is I've covered the eclair and then I've covered my round one. Is that all good?
Great, thanks, Irene. We're just discussing, so the choux pastry was still frozen.
So the choux pastry, so I've just piped these. So these are the ones that I just did. So you can definitely do it on the freshly piped ones. I do think you get much better results. And I guess the other thing too is with the, sorry, I should just change camera so I can talk to everyone. So the ones that I've just piped, I can pipe and bake. But how many are you going to cook? So if I was doing the donut ones, you probably, if it's 2 of you at home, you can literally freeze them and just pull them down and cook them as you need them. So the beauty of freezing them is they'll last in the freezer for a good 3 to 4 months. So you can just bake them fresh as you need them, which is absolutely fantastic. There is nothing stopping you from piping and doing this whole process now. I guess the thing is with the Sable, you can't work with it. That needs to be the one that I rolled out earlier. You can't work with it. It's just going to crumble everywhere. So it needs to freeze. So for me, it makes sense to make the choux, shape it, freeze it, and then cut the lengths exactly. And you'll get nice, perfect results. And the same with the curved ones, you get perfect results every single time, rather than trying to pipe. The circles are really difficult. And you can see even with my long ones, you know, they're not perfect, but I just think you just get better results by freezing. So I cook them from frozen at around that 150 degrees. They take a good 45 minutes to an hour from frozen. But I think it's worthwhile. So trying to explain some of the things that go wrong. So that what I did is I took the pastry, or I took the Sable Biscuit, I put it on as frozen, and as it was moving in the oven, it cracked through the middle and started to slide down the side. So that's how I've ended up with a gaping hole around the middle of that. I've still got that perfect curve, which you can see, you know, you've got a really perfect shape, but you see how thick that Sable Biscuit is? You can actually see it. Can you see how it's come away on that side? It's too thick. So for me, the amount of mixture it makes for the Sable Biscuit, roll it out as thin as you can get it, even if you get 2 or 3 layers, and then just cut it as you need it. So even if you can get it as thin as 1 millimetre, 2 millimetres, as thin as you can go, then get it as thin as you can go so that you pop it on top. If I show you the thickness of this is around that 5 mil that's recommended. It's way too thick. So it actually impacts on how well they rise. Does that make sense?
It does. So you could cut a whole lot of the shapes out of the Sable, and because it's still frozen. If it's still frozen, you could just layer it and put it back in. So the whole idea
is, one of the challenges when you see a cake, and we'll bring it up.
Very good, very good. I'm just doing a zoom.
Sorry, if you bring up the recipe for the showstopper, when people look at that, they get overwhelmed because they look at it and say, oh my God, and then they look at the entire process to the recipe. It's 2 days to make, but when you actually break it down and think about the steps that you can do to make your job easier, things like freezing, that's the one thing I say to everyone who buys a Thermomix, you end up needing a bigger freezer because you end up doing things and freezing things because you can. So for me, choux pastry is one of those where I would make the choux pastry, freeze it in the shapes that I want to finish it with. I would make the Sable Biscuit, roll it out, freeze it. Then I can come back and cut the shapes that I need for each of those. And again, you can layer them and freeze them and have them ready to go when you're ready to entertain, for instance. So there's all sorts of things you can do with the choux pastry. And like I said, you can fry it off as well, which I think I'm going to try tonight. But what you'll see is these have been out of the freezer. I don't know how long have they been chatting, 15 minutes or so. They're really, they've started to soften quite a bit. So it doesn't take long for them to come back to that room temperature. But you don't have to cook them at room temperature, just cook them from frozen.
Would you like me to show a picture of the showstopper cake?
Go for it, yeah.
Sorry, I muted myself. This is the cake that that Irene is using some of the elements from. Anything you want to say, Irene?
No, so what I'm going to say is, like, when you look at that and you think about how much time is required to do the, you know, the profiteroles, and you're also making a ganache to fill them, you're making the macarons, you're making the Fraser sponge. A lot of those components can be frozen. The sponge can be frozen. The macarons can be frozen. The choux pastry can be frozen. So there's so many things that you can do way ahead so that when it comes to assembly, it doesn't take as long. I just wanted to show so these are the eclairs that I basically piped yesterday. So as I said all along my other videos, you can't cut on these mats. So these have got to come off. Okay, now these have been out of the freezer, so you can see it's already stuck. So you want to work with these preferably sooner than later. My board. But this is basically how I do it, preferably more frozen than what I've got here. Let's take a knife. And cut that edge off. And then I just move one down so that I get the same length. And that way I'm going to end up with the same size eclairs. Sorry guys, I'm going to end up with the same size eclairs as I bake them. Now all these bits that are left over, just let them come back to room temperature. Choux pastry is really forgiving, so you can pipe again, remove, pipe again, remove, pipe again, remove. So you can actually play with it until you get your technique right as well. So that's how I like to use it. That's really what I wanted to emphasize today, is why things go wrong. This is really thick because of the thickness of the Sable Biscuit. But you can see it's still maintained its shape, yeah? And that's because it's come from frozen. What you'll find is cooking them from scratch, they will deform a little bit more. From frozen at a lower temperature, they rise a lot better, and you get much more consistency. I want to show, give me one sec to wash my hands.
In a minute, I'm going to talk a little bit about thermostars, which you may or may not be aware of, but I'm just going to pop a little link in here because we want you to vote for Irene, and I will post it again afterwards. So I know some people have already done this. And when she's got a free minute, I will just show you a couple of things that she's made to get to the final of thermostars and what it is.
Okay. So are we, I guess I just want to simplify it. I didn't want to overcomplicate this session to some extent. So for me, cook out the flour, make sure you mix it through. So stop that process halfway through, make sure all that flour is really, really well incorporated. Then make sure you get that really good gloss. And if your mixture isn't giving you that V shape as it drops down off the spatula, you can always add a little bit more egg. As I said, I've used size 800 eggs, but if you buy size 600 eggs, you're going to need to add potentially half an egg or even another egg through that process. So don't change the size eggs that you're buying. Just be aware that you're looking for that drop of that V. You'll know, you'll see it, and it won't be as glossy either. If you're really super enthusiastic about making choux pastry, this book here, Eclair by, I don't want to mispronounce it, Garuharu, basically a wonderful chef out of Japan. You see some of the beautiful pastries that she's making and the fillings. So this book is absolutely incredible. So I'll just pop that up there a little bit longer. Eclair by Garaharu. But essentially, my eclairs have gone from deforming to looking with the right pastry tip. I'm going to show you this photo. They start to look like this, which is perfection. And for me, cooking from frozen gives you this result.
Thank you. There's a question. Do you ever poke a hole in the bottom when they're cooking to let the steam out?
You can, you don't have to. For me, the idea is that once, so when you start cooking them at the 150, they're going to look like this for quite a while. They're going to look really, really small. Once they've tripled in size, remember, we're going to go from that to this. Once you get to this point, you want to drop the temperature. So I forgot to do that. And you can see they've gone a little bit too dark. They're not burnt, they're just a little bit too dark on the bottom. I'm going to slice this open. So these were in the oven for about an hour and a half. Let's have a look inside. Okay, so inside, this part gets pulled off, yeah? That's pretty normal. And if you don't poke the hole, that's what you're going to end up with, a little bit of that sort of undercooked pastry. You can do that with, I'm going to do that with this one. Let's see what's happened here. And that could have been the pastry mat that I used. Remember we talked about the Silpat versus the Silpane, okay? Whereas with this one, I have virtually none of that build up. And I haven't poked any holes in that. But having said that, you can see a little hole, it's a tiny little hole in the top. Yeah. So yes, the poking the hole helps. You don't have to. For me, dehydrating them for longer. So I'll go back to what I started off with. So I started cooking them at 150. Once you get to that puffed stage where you know they're not going to increase, I guess, in size anymore, and the color is perfect, so you've got the darkness that you're after, you can drop the temperature right back to 90 degrees, so you're not getting too much more color on them. They're going to continue to dehydrate, so you don't have to poke a hole. These, I haven't poked the hole, and they're really crispy. I don't know if you can hear that, but I don't feel like it needs it. Yeah. Whoops. So these little ones, now they're still quite, I pulled these out early. They're quite doughy in the middle, and these I poked a hole in, and that's purely because I didn't allow them to dehydrate longer. So it just goes to show, even though they all cooked at the same time, I pulled these out first, I shouldn't say pull them out early. Just goes to show it's not so much about the hole, just getting the technique right. So having said that as well, 150 in my oven could be very different to your 150 in your oven. If they're colouring too quickly, drop your temperature down. My brother's oven, he nearly has to cook them at 130, which is the equivalent of the 150 in mine. So just keep an eye on it. You'll work out the right temperature for your own oven at home so that you get the right results rather than burnt. And how do you know that they're ready? You will basically pick them up. You want to hear that hollow sound all the way through. And you don't want them to be too, you want to feel them, but you don't want them too soft. Now, I wanted to show, I'm going to pull up the bit where there's no Sable Biscuit. That's a very, very thin choux pastry. I much prefer to use baker's flour. I like it to have a bit more chewy texture or a bit more pastry to hold my ingredients, because these are brilliant, whether you're putting salmon, salmon mousse in there, smoked salmon with dill and cream cheese, whatever you like in there, or you're making them sweet. They are suitable for both. Now you don't have to cook them from frozen and then as you need them. You can pre-cook them as well so that you can actually reheat them. So I can cook everything I've got here today and then fill up the freezer with cooked pastries. So I can then pull those down and reheat them and then fill them as I need them. So you've got a couple of options.
Irene, can I talk about thermostars now?
Yes, I think we're good, unless someone's got questions they want me to answer.
We might come back to that. Let me just show this first, all right?
Okay.
So as I said before, I'm hopeless with this stuff. Anyway, I'll just show you here. It's obviously amazing, Irene. I had no idea that that's what choux pastry is meant to be, sort of like dehydrated. No idea at all. So I've learned so much. Thank you so much. So Thermostars. This is a competition. It's like MasterChef for Thermomix consultants. And Irene is, whoever's not muted, could they please mute? Boone, can you see who it is, please? See if you can find that. Thank you. So with Thermostars is like MasterChef for Thermomix consultants. And we started off at branch level and deciding which person from the state we had to start, who from our branch would represent our branch in a state cook-off. And Irene was obviously the winner for that. And she made this incredible looking cake. And I know she's made one of these yesterday and delivered it to one of our team members for her husband's birthday. So really incredible looking cake. Then the next stage was competing against other people in the state. And this is what, so you can see why she's a choux master chef here, could do a masterclass. She made these and it was really interesting. She had an hour to make them and to plate up. And she was actually running outside and putting her choux pastry outside to cool down. But she did an awesome job and was voted to represent Victoria and Tasmania, which is our area. And then this, which you would have seen at the beginning, if you were on at the beginning, a little bit of video, this is the Tropical Sunshine Cake that is her finalists entry. Now, I was with Irene when she was being filmed. That little film clip of about 4 or 5 minutes, that was a whole day's worth of filming. She had to drop the macadamias onto the tray 4 or 5 times, Irene, I think it was.
It was 5.
Yeah, incredible. Anyway, she's done an absolutely awesome job. She's representing VicTaz. So what we would really love you to do is to vote for Irene. I will put that little link in the chat again in just a second. But she's done such an incredible job. I'm so proud, as I said before, to have her in my team. She's the fount of all knowledge. I can't remember, there was some question. I said, can I do this? I was making honeycomb. Irene, can I use caster sugar instead of granulated sugar? She said, yes, you can. You just don't cook it as long. I went and bought the granulated sugar. Way too hard for me. But she's a fount of knowledge and done an incredible, awesome job as always. So thank you so much for doing this, Irene. I think there's been a lot of people who've really enjoyed it. And obviously the recording will be available and we'll send that out to everybody as well. Has anybody got any questions?
Thanks so much, everyone, for the feedback. But yeah, please ask questions. I know that I've just tried to simplify it. I know we haven't looked at ingredients for fillings and things like that, but I really want you to just focus on getting that choux pastry right, cook the flour out right, make sure you've got the correct amount of eggs in there so that you get the really perfect choux pastry, and I promise you'll get perfect results every time. I'm going to jump onto Sabre in a second to show you where I bought all these silicone mugs, but go crazy, guys. We've got Valentine's Day coming up, so one of the things I want to do is put those circles in the shape of a heart, and remember they're going to rise to that size, so you'll space them out a little bit and then they'll stick together, so you can do all sorts of beautiful things to I guess enjoy Valentine's Day with your loved ones if you want to. I have a Joseph graduated rolling pin that sets the depth of the mix. Yes, so I've tried to do that with the with our baking mats. So tried to write, but like I said, I really like the guitar sheet because you can use it over and over and over and over again, and you can cut on it, not with a super sharp knife, but you can certainly cut on it. Unlike the pastry mat, so then you can use the pastry cutters to cut out your Sable Biscuit for topping off. And I do love that, actually, guys. I really like it. It actually adds a little bit of a crunch. It adds another sweetness, texture to the choux pastry, and they look really lovely when they're finished. And like I said, roll it out thin enough so you don't end up getting those gaping gaps as it's trying to expand. It'll expand beautifully and evenly over the top of your choux pastry.
There's a question.
Find the right temperature. Find the right temperature for your oven and just cook them till you get the height and the color. and then basically drop it down to dehydrate. Yes, you can poke a hole in the bottom. You don't necessarily have to do that. Just dehydrate them as long as they need it, essentially.
Two things quickly. There is a question, but I'll ask you that in just a second. City's asked me to point out very sensibly that anyone who votes goes into, well, sorry, when Irene wins, because we're being very positive about this, she gets $5,000 to donate to her charity, which I'll get her to talk about in just a second. But the other thing is that you go into the draw to win a $1,000 mix shop voucher. So there's a lot of incredible stuff up there, including vacuum cleaners. And you may wonder why vacuum cleaners, but Fulbert made vacuum cleaners before they made Thermomix. Yeah. There's a pizza oven coming out. There's a whole lot of amazing stuff up there. So it's a great opportunity for you to enter into that. But if you could just tell us about your charity.
Yeah, it might even be that $1,000 that you need to upgrade to the TM6 that you've been
Absolutely. Do you want to tell us about your charity?
Yes, so it's Parish of the Parks, which is in Albert Park. Every Sunday they cook meals for essentially people in need, homeless, it doesn't really matter. Anyone who needs a feed can go along to have a free feed at Parish of the Parks in Albert Park. They also do meal packs once a month, again for people in need. So just to equate it, or I guess to put a dollar value to it, it's roughly about $11 per meal. So $5,000 is 450 meals that they can provide. So for me, you know, that's I've chosen that charity because I know it can make such a huge immediate impact in the community. So please get behind it. And the only way they're going to get it is if you vote. So the other thing I've been asking people to do is to share it. If you are on Facebook, and that's the only way you can vote because it's through Facebook Messenger, is to then please share it. If you go and find my name, or you find Mandy, or you search for Irene Giapitzakis or Thermomix for Foodies, you'll find us on Facebook. We've all got them sitting in our Facebook with a link to vote, and you can literally share that because we've made them public posts. So you can share those posts with all of your network on Facebook, because the more people that get behind it, then the better chance we have of taking out the prize for my charity. And just for your info, if you do read through it, it says that I win a Ivana pizza oven and a vacuum cleaner, both of which I've already got. So I've already agreed that I'm not taking the prizes. I've already found people to buy them, and that money will also go through to the charity. So I'm really doing it all for them now. So please get behind it. Really appreciate your support, guys.
Thanks, Irene. And there's one more question, and that was,
yes.
have you made gluten-free?
Yes, great question. Great question. Yes, you can. Now, I do not. Okay, back to this gorgeous book. I love this book. Some amazing feelings. There is a recipe in here for gluten-free, and I'm happy to send it. So whoever you belong to, can you just shoot a message through to your consultant, and I will share the recipe with them, because obviously I don't really want to, shoot off copies of recipes right in the book. But essentially, she makes her own gluten-free flour. She literally, I think I was talking about the recipe with Mandy earlier. She soaks the rice for like 10 hours and then dehydrates it for another 10 hours. And like, it's just such a massive process. So you can just use rice flour. And so, yes, I've got a recipe for that, and it's very successful. So yes, you can do them gluten-free.
Thank you. Anyone else got any other questions for Irene whilst we've got her captive in our kitchen? No, I don't think so. Anyway, thank you so much, Irene. Just fantastic. Lots of wonderful feedback, and I will send out an email to everybody, and we will include the link to the recipes and the recording, and also the link to vote for Irene, so that you can share it around.
Share photos with us. I want to see people making them, giving a go, and please, and I'm on, like I said earlier, we're on Facebook. So if you've got questions, just shoot me a private message. Just come back through our pages, even through to Mandy or whoever your consultant is. We'll try and answer them for you. If you want some suggestions for fillings, we can do that as well. And thank you so much again for all the beautiful messages and support.